Welcome back to a DIY Christmas. In this video we're building a DIY sofa console table using Osborne's 4x1 true stock lumber, tapered bund feet, as well as some store-bought lumber. Stay tuned and we'll be right back. For this project we're using some 1x12 pine lumber from the local hardware store, as well as Osborne's 4x1 true stock lumber. To get started we can cut our 3 shelf boards down to the overall length of 6 foot using a miter saw. These boards were slightly over 6 foot when we picked them up, so we can cut down a few inches off each end for a perfect square edge. Next we can mark out the locations for our 4x1 lumber, which will serve as the main support for this project. Each support will be one solid piece, so we'll need to cut 4 holes in the middle shelf to allow the boards to pass through seamlessly. To do this I'll mark the center of my board to get a reference line that allows us to keep both ends matched correctly. Next I'll make a mark 8.5 inches from the edge of my shelf, which is where the edge of my support board will start. From there I can sketch out the shape of the board for easy reference when cutting later. Since Osborne's true stock lumber is exactly 4 inches by 1 inch, we can transfer these measurements to our shelf board for a proper fit. The location of your support boards is completely your preference and up to your project dimensions. For our middle support, we can mark the middle of our shelf's length at 36 inches and create marks for 2 4x1 supports. The middle boards will run perpendicular to the ones that we created on the ends, so keep this in mind when laying out your project. To cut out these pass-throughs, we can use a drill bit to start, then use a jigsaw to trace out the lines that we created. Just be sure to keep the cuts as square as possible and use a straight edge if needed. Once your hole is cut, you can use some sandpaper to smooth out the interior surface, which will allow the board to pass through a little easier. We can repeat this process for the remaining pass-throughs before moving on to the next step. Now that I'm done with the middle shelf board, I'll sand the top side to 220 grit and add a small round over on the bottom edge. Next we can install the bund feet on the bottom shelf board before assembling the unit. For this project we chose the narrow tapered square foot part 408014 on our website. First I'll countersink a hole on the top side of the shelf board that I can fill with a wood plug later. Next we can slide the furniture feet under the board and install with a wood screw from the top side. I chose to install the bund feet on this project 5 inches from the edge of the shelf board, but this is up to your preferences as well. Next we can cut out some wood plugs from a scrap piece of pine using a plug cutting bit on the drill press. If you don't have a drill press, you can do this with a hand drill. Just make sure to clamp the workpiece down when drilling. To remove them, you can use a small chisel to pry the plugs out of the wood. Next you can fill the screw hole with some wood glue and insert the plug to match the grain pattern. Once the glue is dry, you can file or sand the plugs down to be flush with the rest of the board. I'll be sure to leave some faint lines on my center marks and the marks for my board for easy assembly later. We'll be attaching the support boards using wood screws through the bottom and top shelf boards, so we'll go ahead and pre-drill these screw locations to avoid cracking or splitting the wood. I'll also use a 2-step bit on the bottom side to countersink the hole just slightly so that I can recess the screw better. Next, we can cut our support boards to length at 23 3/4 of an inch. As I mentioned, this is the 4x1 true stock lumber from Osborne, part 39641 on our website. This lumber is available in multiple wood species, so be sure to check out the links in the description for your next project. Now we can attach the supports to our bottom shelf first. I'll use some wood glue and align the board on the marks created earlier, then insert a screw into the pre-drilled holes. Just be sure the board is perfectly square before installing all of the screws to avoid any complications with our middle shelf pass-throughs. We can flip the assembly around and repeat this process for the remaining support boards. Next, we can test fit our middle shelf board and make sure that it is spaced evenly on both ends. The fit may be a little snug depending on how you drilled your pass-throughs, so a rubber mallet may be needed for assembly. To keep our middle shelf board in place, we're going to install some 1-inch wood dowels in the center of our support boards. First, we'll mark some lines on our support boards once our shelf is in the correct spot for easy reassembly. Next, we can cut our dowels to length at 11 1/4 inches, which is the exact width of our shelf boards. To create the hole for our dowels, I'll measure the middle of my shelf board and use a 1-inch spade drill bit to bore out the hole. It's best to partially drill the hole from one side and then finish on the other side to avoid any tear out on the wood face. Next, we can reinstall the middle shelf board and insert the dowels into the pre-drilled holes. These will now keep the middle shelf board from sagging and should hold a decent amount of weight depending on your wood species. To complete the assembly, I'll center the top onto the support boards, making sure to align to my marks created earlier. Next, I'll use a 2-step bit to countersink a hole for a wood screw and use a wood plug to cover it. Now that the console table is assembled, you can sand to 220 grit and apply the finish of your choice. Thanks for joining me for this episode. If you're interested in any of the products used in this build, you can check out the links in the description below. As always, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave us a comment, and we'll see you next time in the Builder Studio.